Hey everybody, it's Jonathan here from GraphCMS. Thanks for tuning in again. Second stream, a few weeks since the last stream where I checked out GraphCMS with Gatsby Preview. Today we're going to be continuing with GraphCMS and with Gatsby. We're going to be looking at using MDX with GraphCMS, so with your headless CMS, using markdown and throwing in some JSX components inside of there and actually rendering those inside of your Gatsby application. So we'll just dive straight in with a bit of an overview. So really since the last time I streamed, we have kind of released a beta for the new version of the Gatsby source plugin for GraphCMS. So if you didn't watch the last stream, the summary is that we now have a native source plugin for GraphCMS projects, where previously you would have to use the GraphQL source plugin. And just a few of the benefits of that is that it gives us greater control over the node creation that Gatsby does internally with their GraphQL engine, which enables things like we can download local image assets from your GraphCMS assets to use with Gatsby Image, and we can also do things like Gatsby Preview, incremental builds with Gatsby Cloud. So really kind of unlocking a lot more power with Gatsby projects if you're using that with your GraphCMS schema. But one of the other things I want to address, and this is just something that I've added this week, and that's using markdown inside of Gatsby. So generally, if you're using a markdown field in your GraphCMS schema, or using a RichText field in your GraphCMS schema, you will get a string. When you query for that field, you will get a string that is returned, and in your JSON object, how you use that string is entirely up to you. So you can simply throw it inside of the DOM. Depending on your framework or language of choice, that may render into certain HTML elements. Some people use, there's also a library called markdown to JSX, which will allow you to do, kind of render markdown types, if you like, such as headings, paragraph, body text as JSX components. The thing with that is it's generally done at runtime, at compilation time. So what will happen is you'll have markdown, it'll be passed, then it'll be passed into the JSX components and do the lookup for the component, etc. at compile time. So that's not as fast as what MDX can do, which is generally at build time. So we're going to basically set up a very basic GraphCMS schema project, which is a blog. We're going to set up a Gatsby project, query some data from that GraphCMS project, and then actually kind of use MDX to render some of the content inside of that project, and kind of use some components inside of GraphCMS and then render them in the application. So yeah, we'll have a quick look at it, what MDX actually is. So it's the summary is that it's it's markdown for the component era. It allows you to write markdown that you're used to, content creators in particular, but also throw in JSX elements, and in particular local components that are scoped inside of your application. So generally, when you're working with MDX, you will usually create a .mdx file. So this is similar to .markdown, and you'll write your markdown syntax like so. So that's a H1 there. This will be a paragraph. But what you can also do is then throw in JSX like this. You've got a HTML div there using a style attribute. So then that is then all compiled down by that MDX file into a Gatsby page, or a React page of sorts. Now it's a little different when you're working with a remote CMS like GraphCMS, because as I said, we just return a string. We just return a markdown string. So what we need to actually do from that is, in order to use that with MDX inside of Gatsby, is actually build markdown nodes. And once we've built those markdown nodes, we can then use the Gatsby MDX plugin to render those nodes. So a quick overview of what's going on. Yeah, so this source plugin, which we're going to use with our schema, this will create our markdown nodes for our rich text fields. It's important to note that it works for rich text fields and not for markdown fields at the moment. Once we have those nodes built inside of our schema, we'll be able to query them like so, and then actually use those with Gatsby plugin MDX and render some actual JSX components for our markdown elements. So let's dive in then, shall we? I always get lost. Yeah, here we go. All right, so I've set up a little project here. I've not actually got anything. Just a license, as you can see. So I'm just going to do this real quick. And we're just going to add Gatsby React and React. So we'll bootstrap this Gatsby project, and then we'll go inside of the GraphCMS web app, and we'll actually create our project that's gonna house the schema and house the content, and that we're actually going to query. So let's just dive in and do this whilst we wait for that to build. So I'm inside of GraphCMS here. I'm going to create a new project, and I'm actually going to use one of our templates. So we have a blog template here, and that will help us get off the ground with a pretty basic schema and some example content just for us to query rather than kind of building the schema out from the start. So I'm just going to click on this. I'm just going to give this a name. I can't remember what I call that. GraphCMS. I'm very particular about my names, so I like to have them all similar. So yes, we want to include the content of this template. As I said, we don't want to have to be writing content. We want to get that up. So we're going to keep it in Europe. Let's create this project. So that is now cloning the project here. We'll just keep this on the free personal plan there. Now if I dive back in here, our Gatsby, we've got our, so if we count the package JSON, let's see we have our dependencies now. So yeah, next we want to actually install the Gatsby source plugin for GraphCMS. So as I said, at the moment this is just in beta, so it's actually behind a next disk tag. So if you're installing this, be sure to add that, otherwise you'll get the older deprecated version, which won't work with newer GraphCMS projects. So we're going to do yarn add. And now if we go back into GraphCMS, our project should be built. And we have our project here now. So we can go into our settings, and what we'll have is our nice shiny new endpoint here. And also we can set up a token that we'll use inside of our Gatsby application. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. So that is installed now. We'll see that in the package JSON. So as with anything, any Gatsby project, if you're using any kind of plugins, whether that be a source plugin or other variety of plugins, we need to add a Gatsby config file. So we will create this in the root of our project, and I don't know what that error is in. That error keeps coming up in VS Code, I'm not sure. Alright, so basic setup for this. Yeah, so this will work. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to actually copy this. Alright, so we've installed our plugin here. We need to add our .env so we can actually read our .env file. So we've added .env, which comes bundled with Gatsby. And then we need to add our Oh, I need to copy that again because I've overwritten my clipboard. GraphCMS. So I'm just going to create a token. We don't want to make this public, we want a token. So I'm going to say development, this a name. We want to query content from both draft and publish stage, and it'll default to draft. So we're just going to create that here. You can see we have these existing tokens which came across with the template. So I'm just going to copy that there and drop that in there. And now that we have our .env file set up, the source plugin will be able to read those values, and we actually should get Gatsby building some local nodes for our GraphCMS content. So we'll just do a quick tour of the actual project that we have here. Here is our schema. Again, as I said, this is very basic. We've got two models, post model and an author model. So post has title, slug, excerpt, content, which is what we're going to be mostly working with today. As I said, this is a rich text field, so we can get markdown from that rich text that's written in the CMS and use that in Gatsby. And you see there's an author reference there to this model, which has a name, picture, and so on. So that's the schema. And then in the content we have a few authors, myself and my friends and colleagues, Ronak, Jesse and Jamie, and a few example posts as well, which I believe just have lorem ipsum, but we're not to care at this point. So now that we know what we have inside of our project schema-wise and content-wise, we should probably build. No, I don't need that. We can now go ahead and actually build that. So I'm just going to add the scripts here. My typing quality of my typing deteriorates massively when I'm on stream. So what we're going to actually do inside this dev script when we run yarn dev is we're actually going to pass a environment variable to the Gatsby dev to the Gatsby dev command. So there is a flag. I'll come back to this in a second. So there's this unknown flag that you can pass to Gatsby develop that will actually help you refresh your data. So when you're working with a headless CMS like this, generally with Gatsby, because page queries are static and they are run at build time, you have to generally refresh your reload your Gatsby dev command to actually get that updated content in the CMS. Now if you use this refresh endpoint, Gatsby actually exposes a refresh webhook that we can use with GraphCMS webhooks to automatically rehydrate our CMS content without having to rebuild the entire app. So that's pretty nice little touch. It's kind of unknown. So we're going to have to enable this flag. So we'll drop this in here, equals true, and we want Gatsby develop. Alright, so now if I run yarn dev, we get Gatsby develop. So what should happen now is we are going off to GraphCMS, reading the schema, creating local Gatsby nodes, and actually fetching that content for us to query. So once this is finished, we actually have a nice GraphQL graphical playground here for us to look at. So I'm just going to go over to this. We don't actually have any pages yet, so nothing will load. Alright, but as you can see, we are in here now, and we have our Gatsby nodes for us. They are all following a similar naming convention, which is what the source plugin does. So they all follow this kind of Gatsby convention of the prefix with all, and then they are scoped to the type. So in this case, it's GraphCMS, and then our actual model name, so post and author and asset too, which is a system model that is in every GraphCMS project. So I'm just going to have a look at this post thing here, this post type. So yeah, as again with Gatsby nodes, with Gatsby types and the Gatsby schemas, you have this node child, and that wraps generally all of your fields on your type. So we can go ahead and just run this quick query, and we should get some data back. So as you can see there, we've got our post back from our CMS. So these are the local nodes inside of Gatsby that has been compiled at build time. Now, as I said before, content is the rich text field that we're actually going to work with. So you'll notice it has subfields. And that's what happens when you use rich text. You actually get a raw or HTML. So you can just get the HTML, and you'll get kind of p tags enclosed there, any header tags that you might be using. What we're interested in is the markdown. So looking here, what you'll see is this is just pretty kind of basic markdown. There's nothing fancy here. You can see there's a few hashes or pound signs, as Americans call them. So that would indicate a header. And you can also see these line breaks here, which would indicate p tags. So we've got that markdown string, but we actually can't really use that at the moment, not with MDX at least. So if we dive back into here, we can actually pass this option to the Gatsby source GraphCMS plugin to build those markdown nodes which we need to use with MDX. So I'm going to pass this to our config. As you can see here, build markdown nodes for all rich text fields. So that means our content field here, which is rich text, will get a markdown node if all goes to plan. So I'm going to copy this key and add it to my Gatsby config. Right, so it's I think I need a restart actually for those config changes to take effect. So I'm just going to restart that. So now when we go back into our graphical playground, there should be a new field inside of that content field. There should be a new subfield called markdown node, I believe. And from within there, we'll actually have the markdown node that we can use with the Gatsby MDX plugin. So let's just check that's actually the case. Let's refresh this. All right, it has not worked. Why is that the case? Keep hitting that. Build markdown nodes. Oh, that's because I've typo there. I swear I copied that from the README. So perhaps there's a typo in the README. Yes, there is. So if anybody's watching and wants to PR that, much appreciated. At least that's hopefully all that's actually wrong and it's not actually broken. So now I'll fix that and we rerun this. We should actually get that field inside of the schema. So we'll just let this rebuild. All right, dive back here. Let's refresh this. There we go. Awesome. So we can see here, this has a type of GraphCMS markdown node. And inside of here, we actually just get a node ID. Now at the moment, this node doesn't actually have any content or any value to us, and this is where working with Gatsby plugin MDX comes in. Now, with Gatsby plugin MDX, what it's going to do normally is it's going to actually read from MDX files from your source or your pages directory and compile those as Gatsby pages. However, what it also does is it will create a subfield, a child MDX subfield on any markdown nodes. So now those markdown nodes that we've created from our remote project, they will now have a child MDX field which will contain the actual MDX for us to render. So we need to go ahead and add this plugin. Pretty sure you still need to install those. Yes. The E flag, by the way, for anybody wondering, is for exact. So you'll notice there's no kind of semver tilde or carets there. So I'm only ever running the exact version, so it's kind of just a preference of mine, just to lock packages to a specific version. Helps track down any issues at all that might creep in. That's just a little tip there. Alright, so we've got the plugin installed. We need to add this to here, like so. And we don't need to pass any options at the moment. I'm just going to go ahead and restart the build here. So what this essentially is going to give us is we can actually kind of use, I'm just going to jump back up here. Yeah, so as I said, normally it works with Gatsby source file system, and it'll source pages and it'll source MDX files from your pages directory and build Gatsby pages with those. Now, because we don't have pages, local pages, we have remote markdown string, and those nodes that we've built, we can just query this in our, we can just query for the MDX using Gatsby's GraphQL engine. And what you do with that is you actually kind of pass it to this component that's exposed called markdown renderer. Yeah, so it takes compiled MDX content, which is what we have essentially now that we've installed this plugin, and renders it. So yeah, as you can see, you will need to use this if your MDX content is coming from a page query or static query, which it will be. So we'll pass that into there, and essentially any markdown elements such as a header 1, a header 2, list item, a paragraph, they will be rendered according to our MDX provider and the components that we pass to that. So there's a lot of information there, so we'll just kind of walk through that step by step initially. So let's just refresh this now. We should have a child MDX field, which we do. And as you can see, it's an MDX type. And inside of here we have body. Now, this does not make, so this is obviously don't make any sense to any of us. It's a lot of barely readable JavaScript. But inside of here is our, you can make out the lorem ipsum here inside of here, which is coming from GraphCMS. But with this field, this child MDX body field, that's what we're going to pass to our MDX renderer. But before we can do that, we need to actually build a page to render our posts. So we'll just dive back in here. I'm going to create a root index page. And we need GraphQL from Gatsby. So this will just be a basic this is just a basic Gatsby page. Again, it just looks like a React component, but we have this kind of page query that will run at build time and fetch our data for us. So using those nodes that are generated inside of our Gatsby schema, we're going to go ahead and request or send a query for all of our posts. So it's all GraphCMS post. And we're not going to pass any arguments, but we must remember the nodes field. We want the ID, we want the title, we also want the content. And we're going to, just for the time being, get the markdown. Actually, no, we'll get the markdown node, which we now have, with the child MDX and the body. So that's that query should run now at build time. Just export this function. And inside of here, I believe, then have a data prop. No, need that. Actually, just going to add an alias to this field just because it's quicker to type. So then I believe it will be posts equals data. Let's just render this string for now. We're just going to log our posts here, just to be sure that that query, this query here is running at build time, and we've got our data that we were expecting. So now that we've added this index page, our Gatsby app should actually run. So I'm just going to head and open this, and there's our hello world. Now we logged out our posts. There we go. So we have our 4 nodes there, which is our posts from GraphCMS. So now let's go ahead and actually map through this nodes array and render something for our GraphCMS blog. So just now we have this post, we can do posts.nodes.map.post. And then inside of that, what have we queried for? We have the ID, the title, and the content. So what we're going to do is just going to have a wrapping div there with the post ID as the key. It's important to use keys within React. Header 1 for our title. And then what we're going to do is we're actually just going to not wrap this in anything. We're going to do markdown node.child MDX.body. So as I said, this should actually just be a big string of JavaScript that is going to be spat out onto the page. Cannot read properly child MDX if undefined. That's because I need to do content here. So yeah, so as you can see now, we have our post titles, which are here. Yeah. Yep. And then we have our MDX string, which is no use to anybody. Yeah, that's just a bunch of JavaScript, which we're going to pass to this MDX renderer, and it's going to do some nice stuff with. So firstly, we need to, I believe, just import MDX from MDX to just check this import. All right, it's from the plugin, not from MDX.js. So now, nope, it's not markdown renderer. MDX renderer, Jonathan. Alright, so still not really doing anything, and that is because we haven't actually wrapped our Gatsby application with the provider. So what we actually need to do is actually tell Gatsby and tell React to render components or render HTML elements for these markdown tags that's in our MDX content. So that part of that puzzle is this MDX provider, and that's going to kind of be a wrapper around your entire Gatsby site. So that's why it lives inside of the Gatsby browser file or Gatsby SSR, and using the wrap root element API that Gatsby gives to us. So we're going to go ahead and add that now so that we can actually render something for our page. So if we come back to the root of our project, I'm going to add Gatsby browser, and then we're going to do MDX provider from MDX GS, I believe. Let me check. MDX-GS/React. Alright, nice. And then we're going to say const wrap root element, which is a function which it's only got element. I always get confused between wrap page element and wrap root element. They're very similar APIs. Oh. So MDX provider here. Inside of there is our element, which is essentially the element is the site, the page. And we're going to export wrap root element. So yeah, so what we've got there is we've told Gatsby we're going to wrap our root element, our Gatsby site, our Gatsby page. Every page will be wrapped with this MDX provider, which is using React context to pass certain functions and rendering abilities throughout our entire tree of our DOM, so that this page will be able to actually render the MDX in that string. So we will just restart our build process. So once we've got this done, we can actually go ahead and add some components to actually, some JSX React components to actually render the content from the CMS. Need to import React because I'm using JSX. This is one thing that really bugs me about Gatsby that I don't have with Next, and it's always have to import React. What? I think it's because I need to restart. Yeah, so you always got to have this React import statement at your top of your Gatsby files, and I believe I've read something that they're actually getting rid of that, so bring it in line with Next, which would be nice. All right, so there you go. So our MDX, our compiled MDX string is actually now HTML. So if we look here, so what we see is we've got p tags there. Nothing that exciting. This one I believe has some headers. So header 1, header 2. And these are all from the CMS. We can just go ahead and do that. So I'll look at this post inside the CMS. Oh, I'm not sure what's happened there. That is hardly legible. I will raise that to the team. Yeah, so if we look at this post and we look at the content field here, what we have, you can see that it's kind of a WYSIWYG editor, RichText. So we've got our H1 there, our H2, our H3, and the rest of body tags. And it's really kind of powerful. We can add kind of URL links, kind of code blocks, unordered lists or ordered lists, quotes, images, everything. So we can really kind of give a lot of power back to the content creators there. But then also in the front end with MDX, we've got this kind of powerful level of control as a developer to say that's what this markdown tag should look like. It should render this component, rather than just us kind of hacking away on nasty nasty markdown string, or even just kind of taking the compiled HTML from the CMS. That's not ideal. We want to kind of embrace the developer experience of MDX, and part of that is this, being able to kind of control what markdown element renders what component. Alright, so we noticed there, if you go back into here, if we look at the docs here, what you'll see is the MDX provider actually takes a components prop, and that is an object of components, of React components, or the keys of React components, to render the elements in Markdown. So there's a table here of what can be customized. So the stuff that we've been looking at: headers, p tag paragraph, quotes, that's also in GraphCMS, lists, unordered, ordered. There you can do those in the GraphCMS CMS. Code blocks. So we can actually pass these keys to this components object into the provider, and then what that'll do is it'll say, okay, I'm going to use the component that you've passed in for p tag to render any p tags. So to demonstrate this, we're just going to add a quick paragraph component that's going to be like pink text or something like that. Yeah, so let's have a look at doing that real quick. Alright, so this components argument here, and we're going to say p. It's going to be a function, and we need to pass props, because also inside of props is the actual child, as in the value of the p tag, the actual text we want to render. So we're going to do style, because I don't have any CSS hooked up. I'm just going to give it red. Need to close this p tag. We also need to spread in the rest of our props. Oh, can't spell props. Alright, so we've given it a basic component, functional component, for any instances of p tag within our MDX should now be rendered with the p tag with this component, which should essentially have a red text. So let's dive back here. There you go. So essentially we have got from this here, so this kind of plain text that's in our CMS that our content editors are writing blog posts or creating new marketing pages inside of GraphCMS. Though they're doing that, they're just creating the blind text, plain text in there, and we're actually using the developer tooling of Gatsby and MDX and React to actually render custom components for whatever markdown element we want. Pretty cool. So we also had a H2. So what we'll do is we'll just add a H2 one. So quickly add a H2 component here. Again, it's props. Oh. Style, color, blue. I can't remember the majority of the base HTML color. I remember seeing this error. Alright, there's our H2 and it's blue. Fantastic. So that's a nice kind of basic introduction to MDX. Obviously that was a very, very simplistic overview of what you can actually do with it. We can customize our text and body to however we want. Obviously using something like your own design system. You can kind of attach your own components however you want, or if you're just kind of rocking a CSS library like Tailwind, you can easily add classes here using the class name prop. So it's really powerful to do that. But one of the even better things about MDX is that we can actually render completely custom components just by invoking them inside the CMS. So what I'm going to do here is just a quick example. We're just going to add a test component. So this is a completely custom component. This is not, this is not available to us as a tag inside of the default provider. So it's not a markdown element and it's not a HTML element. It's a completely unique key for a component. And what we're going to do is we're just going to render some HTML, background, color, black, color, white. Don't want that there. Oh. Camel case, Jonathan. And we're going to say this is from MDX. Sweet. So we have this test component now, which is going to essentially going to render a black box with some white text in that says this is from MDX. You'll notice though that it's not actually on the page anywhere. So how do we do that? We need to actually invoke it somewhere. So using the same method inside of GraphCMS, we can just kind of invoke this component inside of here to use inside of our page, just like you would invoke a component inside of React. We're just using the angle brackets notation that everybody knows and loves. So I'm going to save that. So we'll have to keep clicking on item. It's just habit. Alright, so I'm going to rebuild this because we haven't hooked up the refresh endpoint yet, which we'll do in a sec. So what's happening now is it's rerunning the queries. So now we should get that test component that we've just invoked in the CMS should now be available in our MDX. So if we go back to our page, there you go. Look at that. So essentially what we've done there is we've defined a test component inside of our MDX provider, and then we've invoked it remotely inside of GraphCMS to render on the page. Now that's again another very basic example, but this kind of gives a lot of power to content creators who are creating blog posts or who are creating marketing pages, and if they have a specific design system, like an internal design system that you're using, and you've got like a set of components. Say for example you have you want to call in a CTA, you can use a CTA and that'll invoke call to action breakpoint inside of the blog post, or perhaps you want to kind of do a pricing block inside of this marketing page. So yeah, that kind of gives you this kind of level of control over page creation and blog creation that gives it back to the content creators rather than having to rather than the front-end developers having to implement that. So there's a lot of flexibility there to actually just kind of invoke these components inside of the CMS and then for them to render on the page. So we'll just get rid of those because they don't exist. What am I going to do is I'm actually going to hook up this, hook up a webhook to rebuild the Gatsby site, which is pretty nice. So I have ngrok running, and it's forwarding this URL here. We always need the HTTPS Gatsby develop. And if you remember, I'm sure it's just 2 underscores. Let me check. Can never tell with underscores. Oh no. Ah, add a space there. And then we're going to set the triggers, any model. So if we leave that blank, it'll be a wildcard. We want to just watch for draft changes. And any kind of action, whether that's an update, if we add a new post, we want to refresh that, or if we delete a post as well. So I'm just going to save that there. So now what should happen is if we make any changes to our content on the draft stage, that webhook should fire to Gatsby, to our local Gatsby build, and rebuild or rehydrate the content from GraphCMS without us having to even rebuild. So we should see that here in a second when I make a change in the CMS. Ooh. So just dive in the CMS, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a new post. This is a test post. Today's date. I'm going to attach this to myself. Alright, save. Quickly dive. So you'll see here that it's rebuilt. Yeah, so you can see the source plugin there fetched the updated post or the newly created post. So now if we dive back into our Gatsby app, we should have something new in the list. Aha. So that's because we didn't define any content in the CMS, which you wouldn't normally do. So I'll do it as well as I'll just add some basic content, a test of MDX with GraphCMS. Maybe we'll bold this and italicize that, and we'll add our test component. So it's rebuilt again. So we should now have a new post inside of our beautiful index page. So well designed. Seems that the build is stalled. We'll just rebuild that, no problem. Shouldn't take too long. All right. There it is. This is a test. This is from MDX. You can see we've got the bolding there, the italics as well. That's just given to us out the box with GraphCMS. Sorry, with MDX. Yeah, so I'm just going to make an edit to that page quickly. I'll do it side by side. So in theory, this should work. Let's just give this an exclamation point. Look at that, speedy or what? This is a test of MDX with GraphCMS. Isn't it awesome? That part hasn't worked. Interesting. I wonder why that. I've done it again. Don't know why that is. I'm not sure. Not sure if the webhooks are firing or not. We've been having some periodic issues with webhooks lately, so I will look at that. But we'll just quickly add another component here that we haven't actually rendered yet. So let's do the CTA. We'll save that. So we're going to have to add a CTA to our MDX provider. So if we go, again, you would obviously have this a lot tidier in your actual application. These components would probably have their own file. Then you'll be able to kind of carry these props from the CMS. So if you define the props, they'll be available to us in here. So what we'll do is we'll do let's do an example of props actually. And then we'll say so just some basic kind of ternary operators there. So we've got a CTA component now, which kind of checking for the prop sales. So and depending on that, whether that is passed in, we will render some different text. So I'll just save. What we'll do is so because we've passed in the sales prop to our CTA component, we should now see this, a message basically saying contact us for pricing from our MDX component. Yeah, so please contact us for pricing, and that's because sales is being passed as true as a prop to our CTA, and we have access to those props from the CMS inside of Gatsby. So if I take this off now, I'm not sure what's happening with that. This normally works flawlessly. It doesn't seem to be working today, and I'm not sure whether it's webhooks or something with Gatsby. Alright, it's rebuilt though. So now, because we've removed the sales prop, we should now have a message saying pricing is $255 per month. There you go. So that's really just a quick overview of using MDX. Obviously, this is no tutorial for MDX. It's more a case of how can I use MDX in GraphCMS, because this is now possible. So this is awesome. So you can use, you can invoke React components inside of the CMS and using MDX actually render them inside of your application. So it unlocks a whole bunch of power for people, especially content creators, with that flexibility to customize the layout of a page just inside of a rich text field. So again, this was by no means an MDX masterpiece or walkthrough, but it gives you a quick idea of what's possible with MDX and with GraphCMS. Really hope you've enjoyed watching the stream. If you've got any questions or anything at all, I'll put this repository online so you can kind of get an idea of how to set it up. But if you've got any questions or anything, you can get at me on Twitter. My handle is Yonoj, which is YNNOJ. Also Yonoj on GitHub. So anything you want to ask me about GraphCMS, about Gatsby, about React, anything at all, that's awesome. Love to hear from you. And until the next time, stay safe. Thank you.